Sitting down to write this script, I was faced with a real brain teaser. What is there left to say about Doom? There's been articles, interviews, video essays, let's plays, streams, mods, source ports, remasters, books, movies. Hell, there's a TV show adaptation of the book Masters of Doom in pre-production right now. Everyone has had something to say about Doom. Everyone. And at this point, anything that is going to be said about Doom has been said by someone, somewhere, because this is one of the most influential games of all time and literally needs no introduction. And yet, today's public perception of Doom is one that falls into rip and tear action violence set to the tune of heavy metal orchestrations. This is no doubt due in part to the evolution of the series over the course of the last 29 years, and by association, the evolution of the FPS genre as a whole. And this is something that resonates with any franchise. Let's take Alien, for example. Originally a sci-fi horror film, Alien was essentially a haunted house flick set in space. The tagline even read, "In space, no one can hear you scream." But we don't think about that when we think about Alien movies nowadays. No, the public perception has radically shifted over the course of the last 43 years. Nowadays, Alien films are regarded as loud, terrifying sci-fi action films overblown with special effects and nonsensical stories that have lost the plot of what the original story was trying to accomplish. Thanks, Ridley Scott. But this is not something that changed overnight. Certainly, the sequel to Alien, Aliens, was more of a blockbuster action film that took the elements of Alien which worked and transferred them to a genre just to the left of pure horror, still maintaining the bits that made the xenomorphs frightening while imbuing the creative set pieces that James Cameron is known for. The point of Aliens was that these machismo-laden Marines with their pulse rifles and smart guns were little more than bravado in the face of the body horror and unrelenting terror of the reality of their alien foes. Aliens deconstructed the heroic space marine mindset into meat puppets helplessly throwing themselves against an unstoppable force. So when Alien 3, which returned to the philosophical horror roots of the franchise, did not sit well with audiences who wanted more guns-blazing action combat, we got Alien Resurrection, which made a weird attempt at moving into that sci-fi action mixed with biological terror, and the results were, mixed at best. This continued onward with 2 Alien vs. Predator movies, each one dumber than the last, and then a return to the, quote, roots of the series with Prometheus and Alien Covenant. And yet, the public perception became more and more cemented on the action horror, not simply the body horror or philosophical horror, due in part to more and more media focusing on the Marines and the action of the xenomorphs, such as comic books and video games. Such is the same with Doom. The most recent Doom games, Doom 2016 and Doom Eternal, have successfully placed their focus on intense, fast-paced, rip-and-tear, Doomslayer kill-em-all gameplay, enabling gamer power fantasies with glory kills and shotgun mods and upgrades. And don't mistake this as a criticism for those titles, because I love them both. They are absolute masterpieces. But back in the day, Doom was a horror game. It was scary. It was frightening. And I think it's time we remembered that. Doom was something that was on everyone's lips, or at least the lips of everyone who was into computer gaming. Hell, video gaming as a whole, kids, adults, everyone was talking about this game. Despite my very strict, religious, homeschooled upbringing, I knew about it. My religious homeschooled friends knew about it. It was the kind of watershed moment that got everyone's attention, that made everyone sit up and pay attention. Doom released the same year as Jurassic Park, another franchise which has strayed further and further away from the concepts of the original installment, and it got the exact same response. It wasn't just something that existed within the realm of gamers who loved to game. It broke free of the constraints of geekdom and into the general populace, for better and for worse. But I remember the first time I played Doom. One of my neighbors worked in the computer industry, and so his kids had access to a desktop with all the cool specs and all the cool games, and one day they had a birthday party and invited almost everyone over. We all knew what we were getting into. There wasn't going to be any kind of party games or anything childish about this event. We were all showing up to play Doom and see what the ruckus was about. Now, I've stated that Doom is a horror game, that it's scary and frightening and intense, but in that moment there was no horror. There was only curiosity. The birthday boy already knew the cheat codes, and the moment the game launched, he activated all of them. God mode, all weapons, no clipping. My first experience with Doom wasn't the way it was meant to be experienced. It was like walking into a mechanic's shop and seeing a car stripped down, parts everywhere, testing all the instruments. I ran around with the shotgun fearlessly, slipping through walls, engaging in sound effects that I'd never heard come from any computer speakers before. The sounds and cries of the various demons as they bore down on me and then surrendered to the buckshot of the single greatest weapon I had ever seen in any game up until that point. And at first, yeah, I was like, oh, this is a funhouse action game where you get to just fucking rip shit up and kill demons with guns, and my mom will never let me own this game because it has demons and satanic stuff, and there's just no way ever. So I sat there and I played it, entranced by the detail of the artwork and the environments, the surreal, realistic sounds of the weapons and the demons, the depth of the immersion, and I admired it. I wanted to play more. But then sometime later, I went to another friend's house, and his family was a lot more chill about restricting computer games, and he had Doom. And I was like, oh yeah, I'm into this, I know what I'm doing. And he was like, alright bud, let's sit down, you can start. And I went in with no cheats, thinking I was hot shit and I knew what was up. And I realized immediately just how scary this fucking game really is. Let's back up a second. First off, just from looking at this footage, we can see the incredible leap forward in technology that Doom presented. After playing Wolfenstein, Ken's Labyrinth, and Blake Stone, FPS games that operated on a single horizontal plane whose directionality was limited to forward and backwards and whichever way we could turn inside the maze-like maps, the first thing that Doom does is have the player literally climb some stairs and shoot at some enemies at the top of them. There is up and down, above and below, ascending and descending. And sure, we can't actually look up or down, but that kind of adds to the atmosphere of the game. There might be something above you, or below you. You can't see it, but it can see you. So you have to be extra careful when it comes to ledges or drops or stuff like that, because anything could be anywhere. Imagine experiencing that for the first time. Imagine the sensation of not simply walking forward, but walking upwards or falling downwards. Back in the day before this, sure, there were games with jumping and climbing and falling and all that. Flight simulators and space combat sims and all that good shit. There were 4 games in the Wing Commander series by this point. 2 in the main series and 2 spin-offs. So it's not like multi-directionality was something that was brand new or should have been a thing that was thoroughly or particularly mind-blowing. But compare Wolfenstein to Doom. And remember that these are just a year and a half apart from each other. Environmentally speaking, the ability in a first-person shooter, a genre still working on getting off the ground after the success of Wolfenstein, to walk up and down stairs and navigate hallways and wide open arenas with drops into lava or acid and platforms that went up and down, adds a shockingly profound level of depth to a game like this. Even the sensation of walking, with the head bobbing and the weapon sway, now we're no longer just following a path along a set plane. That feeling of movement was unfucking real at the time. XY axis movement, strict and rigid, was gone in an instant. And the lighting. Can we talk about the lighting? Thus far in each game we've played along the path of FPS history, lighting has been very static. Brightly lit, you can see everything in the distance, everything around you. But here, the lights flicker on and off. Dimly lit areas are darker further in the distance. Sometimes it's just completely black and all you can do is hope and pray you won't get caught off guard by something in the shadows. When weapons fire, there's the tiniest flash that illuminates the area ever so briefly. Not enough to see by, but enough to know the effect is very clearly there. Meanwhile, environments and maps are more open, more abstract, following unique paths, forcing the player backwards and forwards along non-linear routes to find the color-coded keys, all while crossing invisible lines that trigger traps and open monster closets which unleash a crew of demons as a brutal surprise onto the player. Or even the simplest of surprises, such as opening up the door marked exit only to have a pinky or an imp on the other side immediately begin to attack you. Not quite a jump scare in the traditional sense, but it's enough of a scare that made me jump when I was younger. And as an adult, it still elicits a shout of, "Oh fuck!" After the release of Wolfenstein in May of '92, the id Software boys had gotten down to work on an expansion called Spear of Destiny. And since the technology was already there for them to work with, John Carmack didn't have as much to do on the project, so he focused his attention elsewhere. The design and creation of a brand new game engine which would be even more radical than the Wolf 3D engine. Initially, the work put in went towards the engine for a game called Shadowcaster, developed by a little group called Raven Software. Developers that we will talk about quite a bit during our history videos. Utilizing those advancements, Carmack continued working on the engine, crafting something faster, something that could move smoothly and look crisp while implementing even more technical advancements. The result, as we all know, was the Doom engine. Now, I'm not much of a technical person, and all the fun little technical details and digital wizardry underneath the hood of an engine like this can and will go completely over my head, which is why in my videos I rarely ever get down into the nitty-gritty on the specs of what certain engines can do. But let's face it, the Doom engine is still a marvel by today's standards. There's a reason why there are indie FPS games being developed utilizing the GZ Doom source port, games such as Head on Bloodright, Sulaco, Vomitorium. The tools and the engine are versatile. Of course, creating a game of any kind would never be considered easy, not by any stretch. A few years after Doom's release, I harbored my own ideas of crossing into game development. I knew a friend who had access to the Doom editor, which gave us the misplaced confidence to think that we could transform the game's assets into a fully playable game of our own design. God, I wish I was naive and 14 again. But I had notebooks filled with notes and doodles of weapons and enemies. I wanted to create a game called Hardcore, a cross between Starship Troopers and Aliens, which saw a group of Marines enter a facility with the intention of rescuing the scientists within, only to find a species of alien insects rapidly expanding throughout the location. The game would have ended with the main character choosing to manually detonate the facility's energy core to purge the insectoid threat as a sacrifice so their fellow Marines could escape. Grim stuff, and completely unattainable since neither myself nor my friend had any idea how to code or use editing tools at the tender age of 14. But Doom was the vehicle that made ideas like these feel possible. Of course, calling Doom a horror game isn't meant to belittle or say the game isn't fast-paced. Far from it. Doom as a horror game is in the same vein of horror like the films William Castle made in the late 50s and early 60s. Films designed to draw in audiences and keep their interests while simultaneously scaring them in a variety of ways. Theaters rigged with devices to immerse the theater guests at specific jump scares, like compressed air aimed at foot level, so when audiences saw the tiny insect creatures squirming on the screen, they'd get a blast of air to make them think something was really below their feet, creating chaos in movie theaters. Or like the kind of horror that Sam Raimi created with the Evil Dead flicks. Unique, frantic, kinetic, dizzyingly terrifying experiences which are more like roller coasters than haunted houses. Doom as a horror game is similar. It never stops moving, never stops forcing the player into tense and dramatic situations where they need to stop, drop, and roll at a moment's notice, where an ambush can come at them from any angle, anytime, relentlessly keeping the player on edge. It's actually quite interesting how the game goes about this, by luring the player into a false sense of power fantasy early on, and then slowly dragging them further and further into the depths of literal hell and torment. Here it is, Hangar E1M1, the alpha, the beginning, the opening, and in true id Software fashion, immediately puts the player on the path to power fantasy, coupled with the opening riff of At Doom's Gate, the iconic theme of the series composed by Bobby Prince, the John Williams of the FPS genre. On lower difficulties, you're relegated to navigating the stage with a pistol unless you can find a shotgun via a secret, but on ultra violence, or as Civvy calls it,
the gentleman's way to play Doom,
you're assaulted by shotgunners immediately, and there's a shotgun to pick up just up the stairs to the left. So our already unnamed Doom guy has a boomstick in hand, the Doom shotgun, one of the most devastatingly powerful weapons in any FPS. Deadly at both short and long range, the shotgun will one-shot both former humans and imps, sometimes two shots depending on the angle of attack, and sometimes even tear through two enemies at a time. So far in the history of FPS, we have yet to see any weapon that does this kind of damage. I mean, look at this shit. Imagine sitting down and playing Doom for the first time, and this is the second weapon you open up with. A one-shot, click, boom, pump, and on to the next one type of cannon that gets the blood pumping and makes you feel like you can just plow through walls of demons in only a couple of shots. Nuclear Plant continues the power fantasy by simply throwing more demonically influenced foes at you, all of which still crumble before your shotgun. But here, we really get to experience the Doom engine's lighting effects, the flickering, the darkened hallways, our first impression that this isn't going to be a simple run-and-gun experience, but it isn't yet enough to prepare the player for the terrors lying deeper within. Christ, even the end-level screen tallying up results is just pure adrenaline. But Toxin Refinery. Now we're getting a better taste of what's to come. You know, a lot of games introduce enemies in very specific ways, but I always forget that id not only introduces us to the Pinky Demon here, but they also introduce the Spectre, the Invisible Pinky, in the exact same map at the exact same time. This is brilliant design work right here. Look at this. Coming at us on the left is a Spectre, which we can only kind of make out as some kind of static-filled shadowy thing. And then over here on the right is the Pinky bearing down. And it's in this moment the player realizes, oh shit, there's this ugly pig motherfucker in the game now. And not only that, there's an invisible version too? Couple this realization with the flickering lighting and the dim atmosphere, and now Doom's horror is creeping in. Because the Spectres, unlike enemies in previous FPS titles, aren't easy to see. and could very well get the jump on you if you're not careful. Another thing we're starting to get used to is that enemies come in swarms. One of them spots you, a series of unholy roars and growls carom across the arena to inform you that you have an entire nest to deal with, and it's damn close to a jump scare every time. Since the demons are coming in hordes that are frustrating to chip away at with a shotgun, the game very kindly provides the chain gun in command control.
Oh, yes!
The chain gun isn't only good for instantly mowing down swarms of lesser foes, it's also nearly invaluable for stunning heavier demons that we'll meet later on. However, this comes at the cost of ammunition since the chain gun's bullets don't have the same heft as the shotgun's shells do. But for now, the power fantasy continues, through narrow corridors with imps and pinkies around each corner, still falling before the might of the shotgun and the assault of the chain gun. As the rest of episode 1 continues, it's a fairly straightforward exercise. Run, shoot, solve environmental puzzles, collect keys, utilize rising and falling platforms, but the game keeps throwing tricks at you. More darkened rooms that are difficult to see enemies in, paths that require you to briefly run across damaging poison in order to access specific parts of the map. Large rooms that turn into deadly ambushes the moment you pick up a key, forcing the player to think on their feet. There's a reason the shareware version of Doom moved so many copies. This was revolutionary. Yes, the game placed destructive weaponry in your hands to help even the odds and maintain that power fantasy, but Jesus fuck, for every imp, pinky, and former human downed, there always seems to be 5 more right behind them all. Sometimes felt like they were literally coming out of the walls. Every corner, every hallway, every wide open space was an opportunity for demons to emerge from nowhere and come barreling down on you. Computer Station provides the rocket launcher for the first time. Well, that is if you don't know all the secrets. If you do, you can get it earlier than this. I'm not much of a secret hunter, so... That rocket launcher literally turned demons into meat sauce, and it was truly deadly if you fired it at point-blank range. Meanwhile, at this point, Bobby Prince's score has steadily become more and more ominous, like he's trying to tell us something, trying to get us to pay attention to the subtle changes happening around us. But the player, leaning forward in their seat, eyes focused on what's ahead, they're not listening to the message. No one is. Because the game is still, so far, a high-speed, intense thrill ride, loading the player up with guns, ammo, and armor, and we're kicking demon ass all the way from here to hell. Then we get to Phobos Anomaly, and the power dynamics shift one more time. Imagine how this must have felt. You're blazing through the game, taking out every single evil spirit like taking names from the Necronomicon. The game practically dumps a wagon's worth of ammunition on you, and you see this shit. Now, by today's standards, 2 Barons of Hell ain't shit. This is kid stuff. But we're playing on ultra-violent, so the Barons aren't just Barons. They're Barons surrounded by a squad of specters. So as you're attempting to unload into the Barons, you're also being overrun by those invisible bastards. And God help you if you have the rocket launcher out during this part. But we beat the Barons, the walls come down, there's an exit nearby, and we, the gloriously victorious Marine, walk into the exit thinking it's time to celebrate. And we're immediately ambushed in one of the best plot twists in any FPS ever. Yep, Doom Guy basically dies and goes to hell. Even the endgame text is like, what the fuck? But fortunately, Doom Guy isn't actually dead. He's just been dragged down to... This is where the game really starts to up the terror factor. Okay, so covering most of episode 1 in detail was integral to making the point of how Doom lures players in with the promise of run and gun action while playing the horror card close to the chest. I'm not going to go level by level with the rest of the game, so let's just focus on the aesthetics. First off, while the environments still maintain aspects of the militaristic Marine mindset, slowly we see things begin to warp and twist themselves into more, well, hellish and satanic architecture. The pentagram teleporter pads, the skull-shaped switches with red eyes that light up when activated, darker, grimier wall textures, and of course, the introduction of one of the biggest bastards in OG Doom, the sweet meatball himself, the Cacodemon. Look at this fucking introduction. Did you catch all of that? The cat-like hiss announcing something new and deadly nearby. The way the Cacodemon was hidden in the shadows, unseen after we teleported in. Once spotted, it's revealed that it was just hovering right there in front of us for that brief moment, and then suddenly other demons come swarming in all around, and so the player is now forced to tackle an ambush while trying to figure out just how fucking deadly this one-eyed meatwad is. Completely and utterly screwed if instincts don't kick in. Brilliant, brilliant design. This is that Sam Raimi shit I was talking about. This is that William Castle shit. The shock and awe, the terror and adrenaline, fight or flight, and with nowhere to run, you'd better be quick with your gun. One thing I hadn't mentioned about episode 2 was that the power fantasy had been immediately taken away, snatched out of the player's hands like a baby's binky. Deimos Anomaly sees the gamer pistol starting against something like 5 former humans, and then turning a corner into a cloud of imps and more former humans. Sure, there's a shotgun nearby, and some of the former humans have shotguns on them, but the ammo is limited, and without the deep pockets we had in the previous episode, we're forced to dodge and dance and make sure every single shot counts towards keeping us alive. Episode 1 was all about enabling the player. Episode 2 is all about making them as tense as possible, and the environments start to get twistier and more difficult to navigate as well. Thankfully, another one of Doom's innovations is the use of an automap. Much like Blake's Stone, the automap draws itself as we walk about the environment, and we can call it up by pressing tab at any time. But the real innovation here is that we can still move around the map while looking at the automap. So if we're lost and we're trying to figure out where to go next, we press tab and run around figuring out which hallway we might have gotten turned around in. Only downside to that is that bringing up the automap doesn't pause the action, so if there's enemies around and you're staring at the map, they can easily get the jump on you. You know, it really is remarkable how damn near seamlessly the game transitions the environments from space bases to gothic satanism. Sure, there's still plenty of science fiction in the environments, just one look at spawning vats will demonstrate that, but hell is seeping further and further into our layer of reality. The amount of demons has vastly increased. Barons of hell are becoming regular enemies wandering about now. Colored keys have switched from key cards to skulls, and in a slick, super subtle touch, the final level of the episode, Tower of Babel, has slowly been constructed over the course of our journey through the shores of hell, further illustrating the advancement of the demonic forces. Now, that's not to say that Doom Guy has been completely helpless this whole time. While episode 2 focuses on putting the pressure on our protagonist, Shores of Hell introduces the plasma rifle and the Berserk pickup. Berserk mode has undertaken an evolution of its own over the years as well, highlighted most as a power-up item in Doom 2016, but here it definitely lives up to the name. You pick it up, instantly charge your health to 100 points, and your fists do massive amounts of damage. And the plasma rifle, another series staple which as a kid I associated more with Doom 2 than with this game, certainly helps even the odds when you find yourself inevitably surrounded by pinkies and cacos, or even better, unleashing on those fucking barons of hell. While we're on the subject of horror and power fantasy, I would be remiss at this point if I didn't bring up both the Lost Souls and the Chainsaw, a fitting combination considering Containment Area's secret room which provides both. Of course, the Chainsaw can be found well before this moment, I just couldn't resist dovetailing these two together. It's no secret that Evil Dead 2, the Sam Raimi connection again, was an inspiration for Doom, and the Chainsaw is the most overt reference to that inspiration. The Chainsaw does exactly what it sounds like. It turns demons into shredded beef. You can even stunlock most enemies as long as you maintain chainsaw pressure on their succulent bodies, but keep in mind that the Baron can and will continue to melee attack no matter how much damage you deal with the chainsaw. In some cases, it's a weapon of last resort, and in other cases, it's an impressive, albeit slightly suicidal, method of conserving ammo. Me? I always use it on the pinkies. It stuns them just enough so they can't attack while you're chainsawing them, and it's an absurdly satisfying method of dispatching those adorable pink fucks. Nothing, and I do mean nothing, screams power fantasy like charging headfirst into a room full of demons with a chainsaw in hand, painting the walls red with viscera, and then walking out the victor. That shit is fucking cool. On the horror side of the coin, Lost Souls are terrifying in just how annoying they are. Look, the imagery is hellish and effective. Floating skulls set ablaze with hellfire, hovering in place until they spot you, at which point they fly forward rapidly, jaws open, aiming to sink their teeth into your soft flesh. But they usually travel in packs of 5 or more, and they take just a little more damage than an imp or a former human. So while small and not as intimidating on sight as, say, a cacodemon, a flock of Lost Souls can and will wreck your shit if you're not fully prepared or have enough chain gun or plasma ammo to keep them at bay. Once we reach the Tower of Babel, the impressive balance of power fantasy and outright terror reaches a sweet, simplistic balance with the iconic duel with the massive cyber demon. No joke, no hyperbole, no exaggeration, this moment was pants shittingly renowned amongst gamers when this first came out. Sure, cruising through hallways, battling lower tier demons, that was shit that we as gamers were accustomed to by now, but this 20-foot tall cybernetic demon lord with a rocket launcher for an arm? This was nuts! But of course, this isn't the grand finale. No, first we need to descend into... Episode 3 is all hellscapes, baby. Sure, there's bits and pieces of human tech thrown in just to show that there once was man-made facilities here, but for the most part, it's all demonic. twisted, infernal architecture and gothic design work. Skulls and warped faces and what look like intestines. Shit straight out of Dante's worst nightmares. And, at last, some of the most fiendish puzzles in the entire game. Up till now, Doom has certainly moved further and further away from linear map design and deeper into more abstract thinking, but Inferno is where it reaches its apex, and also, arguably, the game's biggest frustrations. There are bullshit teleportation puzzles, loads of hellish lava we're forced to run across to solve pathfinding conundrums. Episode 3 is confounding and confusing, and honestly, sometimes it makes me roll my eyes in frustration more than it makes me feel tense. Oh, it's got tension, kids, believe you me. Some fascinatingly specific id Software dick moves contribute to that tension, but it's still got that tension. You'll be fighting with the pathfinding just as much as you'll be fighting to maintain ammunition while chipping away at the hordes of hell. The quintessential examples of this have to be Unholy Cathedral and Mount Erebus. Unholy Cathedral features what is the single most frustrating teleporter puzzle in the game, which, if you don't know how it works, can and will lead to some of the most head-scratching confusion and inability to navigate the arena in the entire game. Where Mount Erebus is a series of buildings and platforms surrounded by damaging lava that you're forced to run across in instances just to try and determine the lay of the land. It's a little ironic that Doom at its most horrific is where Doom becomes its most frustrating. And not that I want to say anything bad about Doom, you know, the game that cemented the first-person shooter into a full-fledged genre, but it really transforms into a bit of a slog rolling into these final levels. By this time, the player has picked up and utilized the BFG, the big fucking gun, and the sweet, sweet bliss of unleashing this badass motherfucker on groups or even just on barons is absolutely unparalleled. But as episode 3 crawls towards the finish line with visuals that simply astound, it also leans heavily on non-linear exploration coupled with forcing the player to put themselves in harm's way far, far too often to feel as satisfying as the previous 2/3 of the game does. As I've been building up to this entire video, the horror of the game now leans on the environments being as hostile as possible to the player. Thrust into the uncomfortable, gamers now need to immerse themselves in the Lion's Den, the spawning point of all the demons and the source of Hell's invasion. And don't get me wrong, it's fine, and especially once you understand how the maps work and where they're going and how to get to where you need to go, the intentional fuckery takes on a sort of genius that we don't see in modern shooters. I actually do like Inferno as a chapter of Doom, but it certainly isn't as enjoyable as the previous bits of the game. Even the game's final boss is a bit of a letdown compared to the previous 2 episodes. Fending off 2 barons and multiple specters was absurd and terrifying. Running around dodging the rockets of the cyber demon while returning fire when possible was thrilling and scary as shit. But the spider mastermind... Okay, so fighting it the first time felt like a dirty game of cat and mouse, considering the fucker has a rapid-fire hit-scan chain gun that can and will decimate your health if you stand still for too long in its sights. But coming back to it now, understanding how it works and what to do, 4 BFG shots and the bitch is toast. I walked into this fight thinking I was in for a fun time, but the moment I dropped down and unleashed my BFG, that was it. Game over. Man, I gave the Macron in Quake 2 a lot of shit for being way too easy to take down, but the Spider Mastermind is an absolute pushover by comparison if you're walking in with enough ammo. I was so taken aback fighting it again for this video that I immediately turned around, reloaded the stage, and went back and killed all the other demons in the arena first before putting 4 BFG shots into the Spider Mastermind and calling it a day. You know, it's kind of disappointing, but at the same time, it's also thematically kind of fitting. Where Doom opens up by placing powerful weapons in your hand and leading the player slowly away from the power fantasy and down the path of horror, it eventually comes full circle for the final boss fight, back to power fantasy, and it allows the catharsis of absolutely wrecking the Mastermind's shit. And in a way, isn't that what we're here for? To wreck some shit? Rip and tear, take some names? That's exactly what we came here to do. And in yet another innovation that was unprecedented at the time, Doom allowed gamers to not only wreck shit in the campaign, but also included the option for up to 4 people to fight each other over direct modem connections. These gladiator-style duels became known as death matches, truly testing players' skills against one another, providing bragging rights for those who honed their gunplay to perfection, and by establishing conventions where gamers brought their own desktops to connect to one another in tournaments, it practically invented esports as a result. Look, just like Doom itself, I've kind of come full circle with this video. I've run out of things to say about a game that everyone has had something to say about. There's no new insight here that I can provide, no fun little details that have never been publicly published or discussed. Hell, I haven't even talked about the development of the game, how Tom Hall initially drew up a detailed design document for the game's lore and story, which was ultimately rejected by id and John Carmack, leading to the now famous Carmack quote, "Story in video games is like a story in porn. It's expected to be there, but it isn't necessary." I haven't even gotten into how Tom Hall got pushed out of id during development of the game and was replaced by the one and only Sandy Peterson just 10 weeks before the game was released, and how Peterson reworked several of the maps, including creating his own. Nor have I even gotten into how our Lord and Savior John Romero pushed for the game to be even more brutal and faster than Wolfenstein, and drew inspiration from Street Fighter II and Fatal Fury when it came to designing deathmatch. Hell, John Romero also invented trash talk during deathmatch, so there's another notch on Doom's belt. I also haven't even talked about Bobby Prince's instantly classic score, which came this close to ripping off Metallica and Slayer in places, but as Romero once said, Bobby Prince was a lawyer, and he knew exactly how much he could borrow legally without crossing the line. What I'm saying is there isn't anything to say about Doom that hasn't been said. I can go over the detailed history of the game for you kids, but others have done that before me, and have done so better than I ever could, and nothing I could say would be a better experience for any of you than just playing the game and seeing for yourselves just how fantastic this is. What matters is this: Doom is a horror game. The franchise has certainly moved away from those horror roots in the decades since the initial release, and honestly is doing just fine having done so. But when I was 11 years old, I played a game that was unlike any other, even more so than Wolfenstein, which literally changed my life. And for a while, Doom was a curiosity, something to examine and understand and learn from, and then it became something scary, something frightening, something which made me sweat not just from the action of playing it, but from the immersion into the atmosphere that it held. There's something still viscerally terrifying about playing it today, about wading slowly, knee-deep into the dead, towards the shores of hell, until finally reaching the Inferno at the heart of it all, and fighting your way out of hell, tooth and nail, much more so than the current brutal combat accompanied by heavy metal that Doom Eternal provides today. Doom, the original, the first and foremost, the reason why this history series effectively exists, was scary. It shaped me. It made me want to write stories that were not only chock full of action, but were scary. It made me want to play more games that were like this, chasing the thrill and the adrenaline and the scares of being put feet first inside of an experience like this. It made me investigate other first-person shooters, read news and reviews on them to the point where I wanted to write my own reviews about these games and find a way to publish them. I kept a Word document with reviews of shooters I had never played, but also reviews of the games I wanted to make, fantasizing about how to imbue myself into the mayhem and the miracle of being a part of this new frontier. Doom was a horror game. A fast, furious, power fantasy of a horror game. One that everyone wanted to be scared by, and is just as effective today as it was back then. Doom is a masterpiece of design and technology coming together to provide an experience that none of us had even imagined before its release. Despite the frustrations in the final stretch and the sometimes slog of wading through hordes of monsters, Doom maintains momentum throughout and only gives the player time to breathe between levels. Doom gets a 10 out of 10, always and forevermore, so say we all, amen. Well kids, we've done it. We've made it all the way through the year 1993 and the impactful games that year produced. Now coming up, we have quite a year ahead of us as 1994 contains some surprising entries, some obvious entries, and one that you kids may or may not be expecting. But first, when we come back, we're going to have to explore the gulf between artificial intelligence and human intelligence and ask ourselves, when is a computer program too smart for our own good? Until then, stay hydrated, stay safe out there, and I'll see you next time, kids.